Well, that was great. I really love that. Thanks, guys. So as we get cooking on this hot day, where we're all cooking a little bit, this part of the line of the Lord's Prayer is part of our year-long series following the call. Let's see, where have we been with this prayer so far? Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. That was last week. So now it's forgive us our... Now, depending on what tradition you grew up in, you're going to put a different word after forgive us our whatever. How many of you grew up with trespasses? How many of you grew up with sins? How many of you grew up with debts? Yeah, the church I went to growing up my whole life, the tradition was always debts. And there was an American Baptist pastor, that's the tribe that we're a part of and that I was a part of my whole life. This guy just really went to bat for debts. It was like, it's got to be debts or nothing else, people. This is what the Greek says, and so we're going to go with that. And so debts was the thing. Well, it turns out that if we look beyond just the Greek and we start asking questions about the Aramaic that informed the Greek as they made this language for us, then of course it came into English, there's a lot more to consider. By the way, when I came to this church, so many years ago, the word was debts, so it was always forgive us our debts. And I changed it somewhere along the way to trespasses. And the reason I changed it wasn't because of the Greek or whatever. It was because that we had all these meetings that were happening, and I heard them say the Lord's Prayer at the end of their meeting. And they always said trespasses. And so I was like, well, let's make it comfortable for them so that if they choose to come in here, they're not the only ones saying trespasses and feel like they're standing out. So that's the history you didn't know you wanted to know, and now you know you didn't really care. But that's why we do trespasses more than other words. So from the Aramaic, we get a lot more ways to think about that one word that we may land on: trespasses, sin, or debts. And here they are: debts, sins, offenses, trespasses, hidden past, secret debt, inner fruit, hidden, stolen property, failures, mistakes, accidental offenses, tangled threads needing restoration, and frustrated hopes. Who knew we had so much to be forgiven for, right? There's a lot there. But I really love this because it opens things up beyond the simple debts and trespasses, which just roll right off of our mouths so easily that they almost become completely ineffectual. Have you ever found yourself saying the Lord's Prayer, and because it is so familiar, almost so rote, that the words don't mean much to you anymore? That's what I love about this particular scholar. It gives us more to think about, freshens it up. And then, because he's also a poet, he's been giving us these different ways of thinking about just what this one line, forgive us our fill in the blank, might mean. And so he offers this poem, and it's filled with some really meaty stuff. So we're going to take our time with it. He calls this letting go, heartbeat by heartbeat. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. Forgive our hidden past, the secret shames, as we consistently forgive what others hide. Lighten our load of secret debts as we relieve others of their need to repay. Erase the inner marks of our failures make, just as we scrub our hearts of others' faults. Absorb our frustrated hopes and dreams as we embrace those of others with emptiness. Untangle the knots within so that we can mend our hearts' simple ties to others. I love this. Compost our inner stolen fruits as we forgive others the spoils of their trespassing. And finally, we end the way we began. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. Forgiveness is one of these big issues that is very delicate and often makes people very uncomfortable. It's one of these words that brings to mind all kinds of often painful things that either have been done to us that we've struggled to forgive, or things that we've done that we struggle to forgive ourselves with, and maybe other people struggle to forgive us, and we wonder, does God forgive us? So it's one of these where people kind of love to hear about it, kind of hate hearing about it. So hopefully not too much hate today. Today, in fact, we're going to spend 2 weeks on forgiveness, so 2 weeks of pain and suffering for you, but hopefully a little bit of help. Today we're talking mostly about ourselves and the forgiveness process that we deal with our own stuff. Next week we'll talk about forgiving others and all those awful people that hurt you. That's next week, so look forward to that. But today we're going to get a little bit more intrapersonal about what's going on in us that is part of our mix and part of what keeps us from doing it and what possibilities exist. St. Therese of Lisieux said this comes from the book we've been reading. If you're willing to serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to yourself, you will be for Jesus a pleasant place of shelter. If you are willing to serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to yourself, you will be for Jesus a pleasant place of shelter. What an incredible statement. It made me ask the question, how hospitable are we to the Spirit, to love, to help? Because I think that's the point that she's making, is that when we are willing to take a real honest look at ourselves and our own stuff and see ourselves, warts and all, we create a hospitable space for the Spirit of God. But, on the contrary, when we're in denial about what's really happening in here, or too afraid, or defensive, even to God, about the things that are going on in our hearts and our heads, then we become not a hospitable place for even the Prince of Peace, the great physician, to come and tend to our wounds. So the question for you, right now, how hospitable are you to the presence of God when we start talking about this stuff, which is sometimes very uncomfortable? Well, this is Labor Day, and we have this holiday for a reason. It's not just to celebrate labor in America, though that's a very good thing. And we've got, a great work ethic in America that we're proud of as a nation. But we also must remember that, in the 1870s, which is, I think, around the time where this became recognized in a holiday, this holiday and this movement for labor came out of struggle and suffering. It was when people came together, when they unionized, that they were finally able to get the treatment from their employers that they felt that they deserved. And whatever feelings you may have about organized labor, realize that some of the complexities that we see now are in many ways different, some similar, but different than before. Back when this first started, people's lives were at stake. I mean, really, really, really at stake. Like working people crazy hours to the bone so that they might not last long. These are the kinds of things that we're talking about that cause people to band together and say, collectively, we are going to bargain with our very wealthy employers because they apparently don't care about what is happening to us. And the only way we're going to get through to them is if we stand with one voice. That's the whole idea behind it. I'm more aware than I used to be about unions and labor and all that because my son works in labor with Disneyland. And so he helps negotiate the union contracts, of which there are many. And with every group that has a contract, the contract is about this thick and takes weeks and weeks and weeks to work out and many long hours. And so I'm more aware than I ever was before. But we have to realize that even this thing on Labor Day weekend, Labor Day is a mixed thing, which brings up an issue for forgiveness. Because on the one hand, we celebrate what strides have been made, but on the other hand, we have to own up to the fact that there is this human reality, and it was a human reality right here in the United States, that somehow, some way, things got so bad that people treated other people so poorly that they had to organize because they didn't feel they had any other way to do it. And that is cause for lament. So even some of our historical dates remind us of this issue of wrongdoing and the need for forgiveness and moving on. So I want to start, actually, we'll go through a list of things that I just want to briefly touch on to kind of mess with us a little bit and stretch us in this. I want to talk about forgiveness and influences and the divine whisper and discomfort and dashboard lights and victimization. I want to talk about responsibility and finally look at forgiveness as freedom. But first I just want to have you be honest with yourself about the influences that have shaped you in terms of thinking about the issue of forgiveness, which requires an owning up to of our stuff. And I know that family of origin makes a big difference with this. And so I'm wondering, in your family of origin, how was this issue as a whole talked about? If somebody did something wrong in the family, was that communicated much, in the family? Did somebody call it out in another? And if they did the person who was busted, did they own it? Or did they deny it? Did they never talk about it? I know that some families, especially with tough guy dads, if something ever bad did happen, they would probably never admit it unless they absolutely had to. Easier just to not talk about it and just keep on moving along and hope things get better, right? And eventually it kind of does. Sort of the dust settles down. But the other people in the family system know that no real resolve has happened. Is that the kind of family that you grew up in? Now, my family, we were kind of stoic in a Dutch-German kind of a sense. And so we never talked about any negative stuff. There were very few fights that happened in our family. Never, ever saw my family or my parents argue, ever. Rarely heard voices raised. Maybe my sisters would get into a fight about something or other, but very, very rare. And anytime somebody did anything wrong, I never remember hearing either of my parents, and I'm not throwing shade on them, I think this is just part of our culture and how we grew up, but I don't remember a lot of lamenting and a lot of seeking forgiveness from another who was wronged. That was part of our culture. What was yours? So family systems matter. Maybe, and I want to be careful with this because you can't broad stroke on this, but some cultures are better, expressing themselves vocally, loudly, in different ways than other cultures. I mean, there's a reason why German and Dutch people are kind of known for being stoic. It's because that's a whole presence in that part of the world. In other parts of the world, you may have more freedom and more celebration, if you will, of expressing yourself. My sister, who grew up in my family, married a caricature Italian and lived into every stereotype with that. And in one way, it was very lively and boisterous and all this stuff, but very, very different than what we were used to. But I know there are limits to this. I married a couple about a year ago, and they were both of Mexican descent. He grew up in a very quiet, reserved household. She grew up in a very boisterous household. Their families of origins couldn't have been more different from each other when it came to conflict. For her, if she wasn't hearing any problems coming from him, that was a problem. If he was hearing any problem coming from her, that was a big problem. And these problem issues are part and parcel to this whole issue of forgiveness. Our time in history matters. So many things influence how we even begin to think about forgiveness. How have you been influenced? Your personality type, by the way, makes a difference. My personality type, I may be more prone to being very vulnerable or feel very threatened by what you think of me than some other people who, just by their wiring, they don't really care what other people think about them, right? And so they're not going to be thinking about it a lot. So when something is brought up to me or to them, we're going to interface with that issue very differently. I may be very defensive about something that comes up to me because I feel like it's saying something about my character. You don't love me? What do you mean? This kind of a thing. I don't want to be called out on that. Whereas another person with a very different personality type may be like, what's your problem? I don't got any problems. This is your problem, not my problem. Get away from me, kind of a thing. Different personality types interface with this whole concept and issue differently. It's important for us to know how we've been wired, because until we know how we've been influenced, how we're shaped, it's that much more difficult for us to actually make ground on this really critical core issue that we all deal with. And that's important because the divine whisper is always whispering. The Spirit of God is always whispering, and that whisper is always, always tainted with shalom. I really believe this. I believe that God is always speaking. I believe that the Spirit is always at work, and it's always somehow under the umbrella of shalom. So when it comes to issues of pain and healing and struggle and forgiveness for us and us dealing with our own stuff, let alone about other people, but just our own junk, and whenever that whisper nudges us to step forward in trust and allow for healing, it is always couched in shalom and never in judgment. There's no need for judgment. The presence of God just simply desires for us to be well and whole. That is the character and nature of God, and therefore, that whisper has to be tainted with that. We don't always want to hear it that way. Sometimes, if I've been up to something or engaged with an attitude or behavior that is destructive to shalom, and I'm in defense about it and denial about it, and the whisper of God says, hey, you need to cut that thing out or take a look at this, I may not feel like it's shalomy out of my defensiveness, even if the whole reason for God doing it is always shalom. And so that means that this whole process of owning our stuff, of daring to say, forgive us our debts, our sins, our trespasses, our stolen fruit, can probably be very uncomfortable. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to tell you that you are already well practiced at doing uncomfortable things for your benefit and health. How many of you just love to go to the dentist? Hey, how about that? I don't see any hands up at all. I'm not alone, right? One of my least favorite things to do. Let's get a couple hands in your mouth with sharp instruments and maybe a really loud drill that, rattles your bones on occasion. Yeah, that sounds like a good time, right? And yet we suffer through these kinds of things for our own well-being, right? To get rid of the pain that might be there or to prevent deeper pain from happening. And we can go through a whole litany of medical specialists, urologists, proctologists, OBGYN, the list goes on of all kinds of uncomfortable things that we put ourselves through. And I have to say that as a guy, anytime I started to whine about getting poked and prodded to my beloved wife, she immediately says, you have no idea what you're talking about. And she would be right. She often always is. I just want to say that this discomfort, this uncomfort thing should be expected, even with God, even with this whole issue of our stuff, owning our stuff, recognizing our stuff, seeking grace and healing because of our stuff. Of course it's uncomfortable. You're talking about very vulnerable things. If you were comfortable with that, I would probably worry about you. You know what I mean? And we're not talking about self-loathing and just leaning into that. I know that that's a huge part of the Christian tradition that we really need to balance off with this idea that, the huge voice of Christianity says you're basically born in as horrible people into sin and you're hopeless and toast. But there's a much earlier tradition that said, no, you were born into original blessing. You're a child of God. You're extraordinary. You're wonderful. You're beautiful. You got so much going for you. God understands you. God understands the Garden of Eden story, that we all make choices that have consequences. But what does God do in the face of that? God is on the other end to care for us, to put us in a new direction, to help us along. And God is always that way with us. We don't need any more shame and guilt in our culture, and certainly not in our Christianity. But we do need honesty about what we've been struggling with. and what we need growth with, and that's uncomfortable. I got one of these little doohickeys about a year ago. You might not know what this is from your vantage point because you can't look at it. I sold a car a year ago, and it was a few years old, and I keep my cars in really good condition. I make sure I do all the maintenance stuff and keep them up and all that stuff. And so I was selling the car, and it was to probably a late 20-something woman. And I think she probably was nervous to come meet some guy, across the Bay Area to look at this car, to meet in the Costco parking lot. To decide. I mean, that doesn't sound weird at all, right? So she brought her boyfriend along, which that makes total sense. And he had much more knowledge about cars and stuff than she did, so she was happy to have him along and ask questions that maybe she wouldn't know to ask. And so we're getting ready to go for a test drive, and he says, "Do you mind if I plug this in?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. What is that?" And he said, "Well, this is an OBD2. This is an onboard diagnostics tool. And so your car has a little opening somewhere, and you can plug this guy in. Sometimes in a mechanic, they're plugged to a wire. It goes right into a computer. But you can buy them now for $30 and plug it into your car and Bluetooth and download the app and stuff, and it will do a diagnostic scan on everything in your car." This guy came prepared. They were going to spend some coin on my car, and they did not want to find out that they made a big mistake too late. And so I was like, well, this ought to be interesting. I think I could take good care of my car, but who knows? Let's find out. So he plugs the thing in, and lucky for me, every light was green. Everything was in perfect health for my car. And he kind of said, "Yeah, I kind of expected this as soon as I came up and saw your car." But then he said, "We were looking at buying a car from like Hertz Rental Car, and I plugged this thing in, and it lit up like a Christmas tree with red lights all over the place because it had been trashed and not taken care of so well over the years." Well, wouldn't it be nice if you had one of these for your life? And you could just plug this in somewhere. You might have recommendations for me on that right now. And it would tell you all kinds of things that you needed to work on. Well, in some ways, you do have that. I wear an Apple Watch, and I kind of like geeking out on some of the things that it does, and it's extraordinary what this thing does. It keeps track of my heart rate. If I'm not doing a workout or something and my heart rate goes up, it lets me know, like, "Hey, what's going on?" And it probably just meant I ate too much pizza or something like that, or I'm talking in front of you, perhaps, although not so much of that. I can do an EKG on this, and it will tell me, is my heart rhythm in a normal space? Is that anything to worry about here? Part of the blood pressure thing is coming back online that they took off for a while. It's remarkable what these things can do. And of course, you can go to the doctor's office, have all those tests done at a much higher level. You can get your blood work done. You can do a full panel, find out all kinds of things about yourself, right? These are good things to do. But you don't even need to go that far, because probably you already know if you've got stuff that's been eating at you or is in your head, stuff of forgiveness-related stuff, stuff that you've done that you've been holding on to for a long time, you can't get rid of it, stuff that's been done to you by somebody else, shame and guilt for whatever that might be. And you might do a pretty good job brushing it under the rug and keeping in denial. But your body remembers. And sometimes your body starts to tell you. For some of you, it's just a little higher blood pressure. For some of you, you may be blowing through bottles of antacids on a pretty good rate. For some of you, it's hypertension. For some of you, it's anxiety. I don't know what it might be. But what I want to encourage you to do is to take a look at what those dummy lights are telling you, and to not take them lightly, but to do something about them, even if it makes you uncomfortable. On July 23rd of this year, it just sort of blew past, and I didn't even think about it until after the fact, but on July 23rd of 2025, I celebrated my 30th anniversary of being an official reverend and a man of the cloth. Well, thank you very much. over those 30 years, when it dawned on me, actually, I was officiating a memorial service here. And I just sort of said it flippantly, yeah, I've been in this for 30 years, and I thought about it. No, I really have been. And I have to tell you that I have a lot of stories under my belt, some beautiful, wonderful stories of people who did so much right and experienced so much life and extended their life because of the choices that they made. But then I have a host of really tragic stories. And some of them are just folks that had the dummy lights go off, had symptoms, had reasons to get things checked out. And they just didn't want to do it because it was uncomfortable. And some of those things were just related to their health issues that may or may not have had anything to do with anything related to forgiveness. And those things, in some cases, really incapacitated their life. For some of those things that are on the more emotional side and the relational side, in not dealing with those things, some of those people sabotaged the most important relationships in their life because they didn't want to do the work, because the work was uncomfortable. It's too hard to see themselves, too hard to come to grips with it, to own their stuff. Some people, for very good reasons, did not seek help. I know of one person, actually I know of a handful of people who, the way their life was and their work life, they didn't have great benefits. And so to get health treatment or to even find out if they needed any care would require them to take time off work. But they didn't have much time off work. And so they lived with the symptoms. And the symptoms just got worse. And the worse they would get, the more they knew they needed to deal with these things so that they could have a longer, more fulfilling life. But then it kind of snowballs. And because they didn't have a job structure that allowed them to take time off work and their health care benefits were terrible, it just ended up taking their life. And they didn't even know, even their family wasn't even sure what it was that took them in the end. Shortening life by decades. Because of the discomfort leading to the discomfort of having to talk to your boss about, I need this time, or I need this space, or family, I'm going to need support because I got to find out what's going on. That's uncomfortable, let alone the very thing that they needed to work with. But the dummy lights are there for our emotional things too, which are often really core to forgiveness issues. So, just a question at this point. Do you know stuff that you're struggling with? Is there anything going on in your head? Maybe stuff from your past? I've got some good news for you. Some of the things, especially if you grew up conservative Christian, there could be some things that you've been carrying around for a long time that you probably never needed to feel so guilty about in the first place. I might be able to help you with some of that someday. But are there things that you know are there? I do want to take just a second and talk about an issue that comes up around victimization and forgiveness. I mentioned next week we're talking about forgiving others, and that this issue becomes really, really sensitive to some people who have been victimized in horrific ways in their life. And the idea of forgiving somebody for such horror, that does not add up. But we're talking about our own stuff. And what I've seen, both in my own life, but then also in others who have experienced trauma, is there's this primary thing that happens that's horrific and painful and awful, abusive in so many different kinds of ways. And so you're left with this wound, and the idea of forgiving that is unthinkable. And you feel shame and guilt and all the stuff because that's usually how it works, is the people are able to do things to you with all kinds of emotionally manipulative tools that make you more susceptible to such things. So you're left with this big open wound of pain, and you're not quite sure what to do with it. And you're fully justified to sit with it. Of course, you've been through hell. Of course you're going to be struggling with this. And sometimes the pain is so severe that we find ways to soften that pain in all kinds of ways. A lot of substance abuse comes out of this, right? Or other reckless behavior to try to numb the pain, to ignore the pain that we're trying to deal with. But then a weird shift happens. Sometimes in our self-medication, whatever that might be, to lead to whatever end there might be, we start to feel guilt and shame for not dealing better with our pain about the primary thing. We now have this secondary thing that we're struggling with and feeling all kinds of stuff about because we didn't do better because of this horrible trauma that started everything off in the first place. You see what I'm saying? And so we almost feel conflicted, like we're not even sure quite how to feel because we still have this open wound thing here, but now we kind of have this secondary wound created by our incapacity and struggle to deal with that primary wound. And then we start to feel guilty and shameful about that. Does that make any sense at all? And so I think just recognizing that that's a thing can be helpful. And I just remind you of Psalm 103, that God gets us. And I'm not interested in increasing any shame or guilt, but just to recognize, oh yeah, this is a part of my thing. To recognize that this is a part of our story matters. Now, my stuff, I think everybody's trauma, and I think everybody deals with a certain level of trauma in their life. If you grew up with human parents, trauma, right? No matter what. On the surface, probably the stuff that I dealt with would seem minor and compared to some others. But there are complexities of the stuff that I've had to deal with that are also very, very challenging and have been challenging for me my entire life. And this gets to this next little piece here about forgiveness as responsibility. I started dealing with my stuff in a cognitive and a very conscious way in college, because that's when I first saw the stuff that I needed to work on, the stuff that had been handed down to me to figure out and to work through. And I made pretty good strides in healing, got some help, and that was very helpful to me, and created some distance and some healthy boundaries that were all good and heading in the right direction. But then somewhere along the way, I talked to a different counselor. I mean, years and years later, which means I was still dealing with some of the same stuff years and years later. And they said, well, the reality is, maybe it was Richard Rohr echoed this in one of his books too, is that the core things that we deal with in our life that cause us pain, which are often related to forgiveness and shame issues and all this stuff, those core issues, maybe 1, 2, 3 issues, they stay with us our whole life. Isn't that wonderful news? Well, it's kind of good news if we know that that's going to happen. Because now I don't have to feel shame and guilt when something triggers a memory and I'm right back to the same stuff. I don't have to feel like, oh, I thought I was over all this. Time to ask for forgiveness for not doing better, at this. But the way this one particular therapist said it was this. It's like we have our trauma, we start to deal with it, and we're like on a low path around a mountain. And we feel like we've made strides. We're done with it. We've left that part of the path. And then a year passes and we're up a little higher going around that mountain. And something happens again to trigger us to that thing. We feel terrible. I thought we were done with this horrible thing. I thought we were over all this work. And we find out, nope, there's more to deal with here, but now we see things from a different vantage point. And this cycle happens year after year after year as we grow in maturity and age and experience. We just simply have new ways to see the thing that has been with us our whole life. The Apostle Paul talked about having a thorn in his flesh that got in the way of his ministry. He could never get rid of it. As hard as he tried and as hard as he prayed. We don't know if it was a physical thing or an emotional thing, a relational thing. We don't know. You are all Apostle Paul. We are all Apostle Paul. We carry wounds with us, and those core wounds we will carry our whole lives. But that's not a hopeless thing to say. It's just reality. It's just reality. The good news is we have responsibility with that. We have the capacity to determine what we want to do in response to that thing that we have always struggled with. And there's more good news. This whisper of the divine is always whispering. And if we're still and quiet enough, sometimes we can pick up that nudge, that voice. And when I'm saying whisper, I don't mean necessarily an auditory thing, but if we are open to the presence of God that always wants shalom and healing in our life, we will begin to see God reaching out and inviting us into greater well-being and wholeness. That's who God is. So when it comes to this whole thing of forgiveness and asking for forgiveness, it changes our approach to it. On this whole subject, maybe you can resonate with this. Frederica Matthews Green, who was an Eastern Orthodox writer, says, "People usually say that a person won't accept forgiveness, but I think what we won't accept is that we did it in the first place. It's too hard for us to just admit, whatever that it may be." My question for you is, do we believe in love enough to be honest with ourselves, to say, yeah, that was me. That was me. It's really hard to do. And we feel shame and guilt just in uttering it. But what we are met with in the presence of God is not judgment, is not anger, it's understanding and love. And agreement often. Yep, I saw it. Says the Spirit of God. I love you. If you need to hear that you're forgiven, I forgive you. It's already done. You're swimming in grace. You can't be unforgiven. Now let me help you move forward. That's the Spirit of God. That's the back end of the Garden of Eden. As I'm still with you, and I'm going to help you every step of the way. So what does this thing include? Philip Graham Ryken says this: "For this is what forgiveness means, to let go without a sense of guilt, obligation, or punishment." We'll be looking at that next week for how we treat others, but how are you doing with this for yourself? To let go of the thing that haunts you without a sense of guilt, obligation, or punishment. There's no more need for self-flagellation. I think you've done enough. So then the question is, how will you choose to build your life on the constant now of love? It's an interesting thing, this concept of now. A guy named Eckhart Tolle wrote a book called The Power of Now. He's a well-known modern mystic author, coming from largely a Christian tradition, but some other influence as well. And he encouraged, in that book, The Power of Now, a way of being in the world that is difficult to sustain. Maybe we get a little better with it in time, but for the moments that it provides us, it's a meditative process that we go through. It gives us incredible freedom. I've led a similar meditation here, and just so you have an idea of what's involved, I want you just to now imagine a time, imagine heaven, whatever that may look like for you. Imagine that next space of life, and we think about whatever beauty that may represent to you, and maybe you have it all figured out. You already have your house designed for heaven, and it's going to be on a beach with a golf course and ski slope and all that stuff. Whatever heaven is for you, maybe it's just absolute bliss. I don't know what that is for you. Just imagine what that might be like, or at least feel like for you. And as you're imagining that, I want you to imagine yourself in that space, and I want you to imagine what you're feeling at that moment. And I want you to just place yourself in that space, and I want you to think about the things that you're thinking about, and the things that have ailed you your whole life, the limitations that you've had, your frustrations, your hopes and dreams that didn't happen. And I ask, when you're in heaven, when you are fully in the presence of love and joy and peace, do those things that bothered you so much in this life, do they still matter when you're there? Or are you now released from those things? And the people that caused you great harm, how do they figure in to your experience at that point? Do you find yourself just not being as caring about that thing when you're in that space because you are in such a presence of healing? You just don't have room for it anymore. So many of the trivial things that bother us in this plane of life, when we're in, if we can imagine ourselves in that plane, Who cares about traffic now, right? Who cares about deadlines now? Who cares about taxes now? You're in a whole different space. And if we really believe that that space that we call heaven is fully entrenched in the love of God, that's probably all we're seeing. It's probably all we're caring about. We find ourselves healed immediately, fully. And when that happens, our heart changes. The feelings of anger and judgment and all the things that haunt us in this life, when we're in that space, they're not even there. We don't care anymore because we're home. And we are in love. Eckhart Tolle suggests that when we are in that space, we are in the now, the right now. We are no longer living in the past, as painful as that may have been and informative, because the past, my friends, is past. It does not exist. The future does not exist because it's not here yet. The only thing you have is now. And you and I have the capacity to be dialed in, not in a denial kind of a way, but actually in just the opposite of a denial kind of a way, in a response to the fullness of grace and the power and the healing presence of God, to choose to live in this now, informed by that vision, rather than all the voices of the past. They will always be an intention, but the more we can learn to live in that space and plane, which still has all the fullness of your personality and all the uniqueness of who you are, but your vision is informed by grace and the full love of God, that changes. What happens in here changes what happens out here. Now you are still deeply passionate about justice, but you are now tinged with grace all the way through. You're not making matters worse anymore. You are shalom walking around. You're going to still take the conflicts seriously that you find yourselves in, but you carry a different air about you now because you have dealt with the stuff that has kept you from doing it in a healthy way before. These things are deeply related to forgiveness because they're deeply related to our wounds and how we interface with those. When we dare to say to God, forgive us our sins, our trespasses, our debts, our spoiled fruit that we've stolen from someone else, and all the other things, we are saying to God, heal us from our deepest pain, that we will not live any more from our pain. And I hope you can see what incredible freedom that kind of forgiveness can bring. The weight removed. More than just God's forgiven me of all the stuff so I can live my life free. No. Much better than that. That's always there. It's always been there for you. But now this capacity to be free of the self-loathing that we have toward ourselves and the hatred we have toward another. Gone. It's possible, increasingly sustainable, and absolutely liberating. I don't have a 3-step formula to finish this off, just possibility and an invitation to consider all these different things that are a part of your process, and inviting the Spirit of God and inviting you to pay attention to the Spirit of God and what is God's movement toward you to your well-being, because God is always about that. Let's pray together. So God, as we wrap up our time in this space, remind us that we're not leaving you behind. And you're not leaving us either. You are closer than a brother and a sister. You are with us every step of the way. not to judge us, not to smite us, not to nag us, but to love us. As we are able, you invite us. As we are able to hear you, you invite us. As we're able to see your work in our lives, you invite us forward into deeper shalom, which means healing, which means peace, which means well-being, which means harmony, which means love at greater and greater depths. May we be open and receptive. May you give us courage to be vulnerable with you, vulnerable with ourselves, to allow you to speak healing into our lives. Maybe what we need to hear today is your gentle whisper to say, you can stop feeling bad about that now. You've beat yourself up enough. I haven't been beating you up at all. I love you. Let me take that weapon out of your hands so that you can just rest in my love. And for some of you too frightened to see for yourself who you are because of the thing that's got you, can you sense the presence of God just coming alongside, putting an arm around your shoulder and just saying, it's all right. I know everything about you. I see everything, even things that you don't know that influenced you. I know you, and I love you. So let's talk things through, because I want you well. You're amazing, and I love you. I want you well. There's 100 other ways God may be whispering to you. Can you hear it? Can you sense it? Will you trust it? God, as we go, may we recognize your invitation is always there, not as a burden, but an opportunity that we might continue to experience life at its fullness, built on your love and grace. May we be open and willing. I ask this in the name of Jesus, who we follow. Amen. Thank you so much for coming today. Hope it was a good experience. Come back for more next week when we talk about forgiving other people. See you then.